Welcome to the third video in this video series on building an e-commerce website using React Redux, GraphQL, and Firebase. In today's video, we're going to be implementing Google sign-in into our React application. We're going to be also not only signing them in, but I'm going to show you how to restrict access to pages. I'm going to show you how to store that information in your Firebase database, and I'm going to show you how to manipulate components based on their auth status. Now, just to give you a quick demonstration of what you will have built by the end of this video tutorial, is of course we will have added a new login button in the header of our application. Once you click that, we'll have a new page with a sign in with Google button. If you click that, it's going to launch a pop-up. You'll be able to select your account and log in. Once you do log in, you'll be redirected to the home page. The header will update with a new logout link, and if you click logout, it will of course log you out. And of course, under the hood in your Firebase database, that user, their information will then of course be stored in your Firebase database. Now, before I begin this video tutorial, I just want to encourage you guys to check out our official YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Your support goes a really long way. But I also want to encourage you guys to check out our official playlist for this video series. As I said, this is going to be a long series where we cover lots of different things along the way. But of course, this is the third video, and it will be going into this playlist, which is an official one for this series. I'll post a link in the description of this video, but you can also find it by just visiting our channel, which is youtube.com/simpletut, and looking at our playlists and our content. But of course, we'll be adding them to this particular playlist, which is just a great resource for you if you want to follow this series closely. Additionally, this is the official GitHub repository for the project. At the end of every tutorial, I'm pushing to this particular repository, and I'm merging with master, so you can compare your code with mine. You can clone the project, just run it locally on your machine. You can look at the files just on github.com. Of course, visit our official website, that's simpletut.com. Again, we just post links to all of our open source projects and our tutorials. We're adding to all of these all of our channels on a very regular basis. So before we're actually ready to integrate Firebase into our application, we need to set up our Firebase account and configure our database correctly. So to do that, just head over to the Firebase website and sign in to your Google account. Once you do that, you're going to have the option to click a link in the top right corner. It takes you to the console. So go ahead and select that. Now, assuming you haven't created a Firebase project before, you're going to have a link to create your first one. So just click on create a project. You're going to be asked to give it a name. You can name it anything you want. I'm going to call it my e-commerce website. And then just go ahead and click on continue. I'm also going to choose to disable analytics because I personally don't need it. But feel free to configure this as you want. I'm just going to click on create project, and it's just going to take a few moments, but it's pretty incredible. Firebase takes care of just so much under the hood stuff for you. So it's pretty incredible how quick this is when you are setting things up. Just the amount of things that it is creating for you in the background that you don't even need to worry about. And that's one of the beautiful things about Firebase. Things like Auth authentication. These are immensely complicated and probably would require a whole series of videos just to try and cover it, that kind of authentication. But with Firebase, all of these kinds of things are taken care of for you, and you only have to interact with pretty straightforward APIs to actually get it working in your application very, very quickly. So it really is just a fantastic resource for the right types of applications. So let's go ahead and use it. It's already created it, so just click on continue. That will bring you to your project, and of course this is your control panel. Of course, I want to go through the different parts of this that we're going to be working with. The main tab here, the main develop tab, is the one that we're going to be focusing on. But before I get to that, although we've created our project, we need to create our Firebase application. So to do that, on the home page of your control panel, you're going to have this section here which asks you what kind of implementation that you're looking for. For example, is it an iOS implementation? That would be like an Apple iPhone. Is it an Android implementation? That would be like a normal Android phone. Or is it a web implementation? And of course, this is what we are looking for. So click on the web option. That's going to ask you to create, to register your app, right? Which we haven't done yet. So it just asks you for a name, and I'm going to call this my React app. And I also am going to leave this box unchecked, right? Because this is asking us if we need Firebase hosting. We do not, so just leave this unchecked and click on register app. Okay, so once you've done that, as I said before, we were setting up the implementation, right? And this is this window is giving us an example of a web implementation. But this is not exactly what we want, right? Because we are building a React application. So our implementation of this is going to be slightly different. The only part of this that we do need is the configuration object that you can see here. So it says var Firebase Config. So just copy that configuration object. So just copy that to your clipboard, because later on in this tutorial, when we integrate this into our application, we're going to come back and we're going to require that configuration object. So just copy that because it has things on it like your API key and your other important credentials that will allow us to connect our application with our own personal Firebase database. So it's very important you copy this configuration object. Once you have copied that to your clipboard, just click on continue to the console. Once you've done that, very quickly you'll be brought back to your control panel. Those option to click on, setting up your first implementation, they've gone away. You have this option to click on your app. So if you need to get back to it, if you didn't copy that configuration object before, you can come here. It will show you the different applications, your different apps that you have here in this project, and you can just click on this settings wheel to actually get back and grab that configuration object. Now I already have it, so I don't need to do that, but I just want to let you guys know that if you need to, you can come back and access it by clicking that. Now the other thing that I want to just let you guys know is that when you created your Firebase project, you were automatically signed up to the free Spark plan. You can see the plan that you're on here in the bottom left corner. As you can see, we're on the free Spark plan, and this is what we're going to be using throughout this series. And even when we actually deploy this to production, you're not going to need to, the free plan is more than enough. Okay, so we're now ready to move on to just configuring our Firebase database and setting up some of our authentication methods. So again, we want to come under this develop tab, and we have this first option for authentication. So we need to go ahead and select that. We then get a few tabs, and the one we're interested in right now is the sign-in method. So I want you guys to click that. Now, what it's going to show you is your sign-in providers, right? So obviously in this video, we're looking at setting up a Google sign-in flow, right? So we want people to be able to come to our sign-in page, click on sign in with Google, and once they sign in, they'll be signed in to our website, and we'll also store that information in our Firebase users database. But with Firebase, as I already mentioned, they provide you with a lot of different types of providers. So for example, you have Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Yahoo, Microsoft, Apple, etc. You also have the option to actually set up a normal email and password sign in, sign up flow. And this is just the first video where we're looking at authentication. In the next videos, we're going to be looking at more and more of these, specifically the email and password provider. But as I said, this video is focused on the Google sign in. So that's the only one we're going to look at in this particular tutorial. So what I want you to do is for the Google provider, I want you to click on this edit icon. Once you do, it's going to ask you to enable it. So just toggle this to enable it. And don't worry about the public facing name, but it asks you for a project support email. And what I want you to do is just use this drop down to select your email address that you have associated with this account, or if you have multiple available, then just go ahead and select whichever one you want here. Once you've done that, just click on save. And once that's done, you're going to see that this status for your Google provider has turned green, and it now says enabled. And that's what we need to set up for this tutorial. But again, pretty much throughout this entire control panel, we're going to come back throughout the series, and we'll probably be making adjustments as we go. But that's enough for now. The next thing that we want to look at is our database, because we don't currently have that set up, right? So if you click on the database option, and it's going to give you the option to create your first database. So click on create database, and it's then going to ask you for the mode that you want to set up your database under, right? So you have the production mode or the test mode. We want to select the test mode. And I don't want to go through this in too much detail at this point, but all this is really asking us right now is the rules to our database. Now, we're obviously in the development phase of our project, so we don't need to worry about this too much now. So I want to set this up under test mode, and all we're going to do is click on next. And it's going to ask you, obviously, for your cloud Firestore location. So really, this is just about your current location. Now, I'm currently in Europe, so I'm going to use this to select Europe. You can either leave this as default, or you can select the region that's closest to you. Just click on Done. Okay, so at this point, our database has been created, and we're almost ready to start coding. But before we do that, I just need to come over to the Rules tab of our database. And I just want to tweak the rules. So this might look as a bit weird to you. It kind of looks like a big JSON object, but it's not quite right. But these are the rules to your database. So your read and write privileges, your access rights, right? So what we want to do is we just want to remove everything after allow read write, right? And I want you to delete that and replace it with a semicolon. Now later on and of course click on publish to save those changes, and then we're ready to just come back over to the data tab. So the way that it works is you have collections within your Firebase database. So I'm going to have a collection of users, and you can view these collections almost as if they were tables. So if you're familiar with MySQL, then of course you're familiar with tables, and collections are a little bit like tables. So in this case, we're going to have a collection of users. So if you click on next, now collections contain documents, right? And documents are like the rows within a MySQL table, right? And within these documents, and I'm just going to auto generate an ID for this document. Within this document, we have fields. So for example, I might have a display name field. So display name, this would be a field which accepts the type of string, and the value could be, Ashley. And you could add more fields if you wanted. So every document is almost like a new user, right? And every document contains fields which are information, like, for example, display name. So let me just save this, and I'll show you what that looks like. So within our database, we have a collection of users. The collection contains documents, which are basically users. And each of those documents contains fields, which are information, like, for example, your first name, your last name, or in this case, display name. And of course, every document can contain its own collections. So I could add another collection within this document, and it would look the same as the user's collection. Okay, so we're finally ready to start coding our application. What we're going to do is set up our sign-in page with a Google sign-in button. And of course, we're going to sign users into the application, but we're also going to store the user's information in our Firebase database. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing we need to do is come over to our terminal window. Of course, I'm already within my application within terminal. I'm also on the branch that I want to work in. And what I want to do is just install the new dependency, which is Firebase. So to do that, I'm just going to do npm install Firebase. And it's just going to install that dependency for us. Fantastic. Okay, so once that's done, I'm just going to restart my application. So I'm just going to do npm run start. That's going to rerun the application. Okay, so now that I have that running again, I'm ready to start working with Firebase within my application. So let's just come back over to the browser and let's just talk about what it is exactly that we're looking to build. So what I want to do is I want to have a link in my header that will take the users to sign in. That will take them to a new page, and on that page we're going to have a Google sign-in button that when the user clicks it, they'll be able to sign into their Google account in a little pop-up window. And once they're signed in, we're going to either we're going to store that user's information in our Firebase database. But we also want to actually update our application to show that the user is signed in. We also want to have a sign out option. So that's what we want to set up in this tutorial. So let's go ahead and make a start. Now, we've already installed the required dependency. So let's come back over to our text editor. And we want to go into the source folder and create a new folder called Firebase. And within this, we're going to have two files. The first one is a config.js. And I'm just going to set up a export const I'm going to say Firebase config. And it's going to equal the configuration object that we copied in from our Firebase project. Now, if you have forgotten it, or maybe you've lost that, I'm going to show you how to get it back. You need to come back over to your Firebase control panel. You need to go to your project overview. You need to select your app and click on the edit button. And then you can just scroll down the page and you're going to see your configuration object here. So either copy that again, or if you already have it, just return back to your text editor, and I want you to paste in that object here. The next thing we need to do is create our utility file, and this is where we're going to put all of our Firebase code. So we're just going to have a utils file, so utils.js. And of course, we're going to import that Firebase configuration object. So we're going to import from config our Firebase config object. The next thing we need to do is actually import Firebase itself. So let's go ahead and import Firebase. So Firebase from Firebase. Now Firebase is a very big library, right? And we're only going to be interested in specifically Auth and Firestore. So we're going to use Auth to obviously set up our authentication providers. We're going to use Firestore to actually manage our storage, so to actually store information in the database. So we only want to import those specific two packages, right? So to do that, we'll just say /app to import the Firebase utility library. And we want to import specifically, we want to add to this Firebase keyword, specifically we want to add the Firebase Firestore. And we also want to add the Firebase Auth library. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add a new link to our header to sign in a user. So let's come back over to our text editor and let's go into our components and our header component index, and we want to add a new link. So I'm just going to duplicate this code, and the link is going to take the user to a login route. So we'll just have some text here for login. Let's save that and return to our browser. And you can now see that it has messed up our CSS a little bit. So let's just come back over and take a look at our CSS. And we need to set this to display inline block. Let's have a look at that. So that looks okay, but we do need a little bit of a margin between them. So again, let's come back here, and I think a margin right of about 15 pixels should be good. But again, this is rem, so 1.5 rem. Now if we save that and come back over to our browser, that's going to look a lot better. But if we inspect that, we'll find that it's also added an unwanted margin on the last list item. So that means that there's an extra space from the right that we don't want. So we only want to apply that margin on the first list item. We don't need it on the second. So let's come back to the browser, and we're going to target the last list item. So the last child, and we're going to remove the margin right. So if I come back to the browser again, this last list item doesn't have a margin, the first one does. So they're now separated and look right. Now if we click on login, the route doesn't exist. So we're just taken to a blank page. So we need to fix that. So to do that, we need to create a new page. So in our pages folder, let's add another page. And we're going to say that this is our login page. And as the other pages, we need an index.js. We also need a style sheet, so styles.scss. Now this is going to be a functional component, so we just need to import React from React and create a const, call it login. It's going to equal a function, so props, and we want to return, for now let's just return a div, and we want to export default login. And just so that we know it's working, let's put in a h1, let's just say login page, and let's save that. Okay, now we've done that. Let's head, we also need to of course import our style sheet, so we're just going to import our styles.scss. Cool. So okay, so the next thing that we want to do is head over to our routes. So we need to add that to our routes. So we'll go to app.js, and we need to import our new page. So let's import login from pages/login, and we need to create our new route. So I'm just going to duplicate the route we created for our registration page because we were using the same layout we want to use. And I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to replace the registration component with login. And I'm going to change the path to login. And that's all we need to do in order to set up our new page. Okay, so as you can see, we now have our login page. But what we want to do is we want to build basically our form, right? We need to have a button on this page that allows us to sign in with Google. So the first thing that we need to do is let's just go ahead and create a new sign-in component. So we're gonna have a sign-in component, and this sign-in component is gonna have a index.js file. It's also gonna have a style sheet, so styles.scss. And this is just going to be another functional component. So we want to first of all import React from React, and we'll need to create that component. So it's going to be const sign in equals props, which is equals a function which returns, for now, it's going to return a div, and the div is just going to have a class of sign in, and we want to obviously export default sign in. So we're going to need to import sign in on our login page. So let's go ahead and import our sign in component from here. So we'll go into components and sign in, and of course we just want to render our sign in component here. Great. So that's all we're going to do within our login page component. The other thing we need to do is import our style sheets. So let's import that. So styles.scss. And what I want to do is just build the structure of our form, right? So to do that, I'm just going to have basically in the styles, going to target sign in, and we're going to add a display block, and we're going to add a width of 100%. We're going to have a max width of let's say about 400 pixels. So it's actually going to be point rem. And also we want a border of 1 pixel solid black, and we're going to center it. So we're going to add a margin. Let's add something like 40 rem from the top. We're going to center it with auto, and from the bottom have something like 60 rem. Right, now let's come back, and you can see at the moment we just get this like black line, and the reason that we get that is because the div tag is empty. It's just collapsing on itself. So we need to add a form, right? We need to add into something into this. What I'm going to do is within the sign-in component, I want to have a heading, right? So I'm going to have a div here, right? First of all, it's going to have its own class name, which is going to be wrap, and within that I'm going to have a h2, and within my h2 I'm just going to have login. So let's add some styles to that. So we have our sign in style sheet. We want to target wrap, and within wrap we're going to have padding. We're going to have basically 10 pixels on the left and right sides of our div tag, and then we want to target our h2. Let's set a font size of something like 22 pixels, a line height of 1, and a font weight of 400, but we want to do a text transform to be uppercase. We will also set here display, well, let's set display block width of 100%, and we want to set the text align to be center, but we want to make sure that this is not got any margin or padding inherited on our h2, on our heading element, our heading tag. So that's how it looks at the moment. That does look okay. I think we need some extra margin, extra padding though. So actually on this, let's set something a bit more, and that looks about right. Now we want to basically have, now thinking ahead, we're going to have various different forms on our website. We're going to have a registration form. We're going to have a sign-in form when we actually look to implement an email and password workflow. But we're also going to have forms for other pages like our checkout pages, etc., further down the line. So we want to make these components as reusable as possible. I mean, that's the concept that is React, that the code should be modular, it should be reusable. So these are the types of components we need to make reusable within our application. So let's use this as an opportunity to implement that. So what I want to do is I'm going to eventually add more form fields to this. So users can sign up and sign in with an email and password. Right now, all we are doing is adding a single button that will allow us to actually implement Google sign-in. But thinking ahead, we do need form components. So let's create those. So within our components folder, we're going to have a new folder. We're going to call this forms. These are going to contain, this folder will contain all of our form components. The only one we're going to create today is our button component. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do a button component. So button, and within this, we're going to have a index.js file, and we're also going to have another style sheet, so styles.scss. And what we want to do is we just want to import React from React. We're going to import that style sheet, so styles.scss, and then we want to build our component. So it's going to be const button. It's going to equal a functional component, but we want to destructure from props. Two things. The first thing is children. This will allow us to pass, custom HTML into the actual button itself. So for example, if we wanted to pass text or even a span, we could do that. So we're going to use the children prop, but we also might want to pass in other custom props. So we're going to say other props so that we can do that. And then we just want to return the button itself. Of course, we need to export default button. Oh, not buttons, button. And then of course we'll just have our HTML5 button here. And of course we may want to, as I said, pass through the other props here. So we're going to use the other props, but we want to have a class name here, which is going to be btn. But of course we're also going to just return the children here as well. Okay, so we're now ready to actually use that button. So to do that, we're going to import our button component. So we'll import button from our reusable forms button component. Once we've imported it, we can use it. So underneath our login h2, we're going to have a new div tag. We're going to have a class on this called our form wrap. And within this, we're going to have a form, which we're going to use in the future. But for now, we're going to have a div tag within this that allows us to have our social logins. So social sign in, and we're going to have our another div here. Which is going to be row, but we're going to have within that, we're going to have our button component, and we want to say sign in with Google. So we're going to need to add some custom props to this eventually. Okay, so we're now getting our sign in with Google button, but it's not styled correctly. So we want to style that. But we don't want to add the style for the button in this particular sign-in component. We want to add it into the forms one. So if we come back to our forms component and our forms button style sheet, let's target and style our button here. So what I want to do is just target it. And I want to set this to display block. I want to set the width to be 100%. I want to remove any kind of margin and any kind of padding for now. And I want to set the background to be black. And I want the text color to be white. And I'm going to set the font size to be something like, let's try 20 pixels, line height of 1, and a font weight of 400, but we are going to do a text transform to uppercase. Okay, let's come back and have a look at that again in the browser. That looks not too bad, but I think what I would like to do is change the font weight to 300, see how that looks. maybe just make this 18 pixels rather than 20. And we do need some padding, and we need to remove the border. I'm going to remove the border, and I'm going to remove the outline. Set the outline to none. And for the padding, let's add something like 10 pixels. So top and bottom. Let's come back to the browser and have another look. And yep, that looks a lot better. But we do need a bit of a space here. So to implement that, I'm going to come back over to our text editor. But I'm going to come back to my sign-in component. And my sign-in, as you can see, we have this social sign-in class. And in my sign-in component style sheet, under the H2, I'm going to target that class. I'm going to add a margin top of about 30 pixels. Okay, so let's come back to the browser, and again, we just have that space now, which is what I wanted. Great. So what we've managed to do so far is we've got our new login page, our new login route. We have basically set up our wrapper to insert our form, and we have a sign in with Google button. And I just noticed there's one thing I missed on the button. So if I come back to the button style sheet, I just want to add cursor pointer. And that just means that when I hover over the button, my cursor changes to show me that this is clickable. Let's create the utility function that we're going to call on the click event of this button to sign in users. To do that, let's head over to our text editor. And let's go to our Firebase utility file. The first thing we need to do is connect to our Firebase database. So to do that, just call firebase.initializeApp and pass it our Firebase configuration object. We are going to need to export 2 instances of Auth and Firestore that we can use throughout our application. So we're going to export const Auth, and that's going to equal firebase.auth, and we also need another one for Firestore. So we're going to export const Firestore, and that's going to equal firebase.firestore. And okay, so now we need a utility function that we can call on the on-click event of our sign in with Google button. So to create that, we're going to say, export const sign in with Google. And this is just going to be a function that calls another function on Auth, which is going to be sign in with pop-up. And sign in with pop-up accepts a provider, which we need to create for our Google sign in. So we're going to say const Google provider, and you can create custom providers for Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, etc. In this example, we're doing it for Google. And all you need to do is create a new instance of firebase.auth.Google Auth provider. And we need to pass our Google provider to our sign in with pop-up function. But I also want to set some custom parameters on my provider. So I'm going to call Google provider.set custom parameters. And what I want to set is the prompt. And I want to set it to select account. So once I've done that, I can come back over to my sign-in component. And because on my button component, we are using this other props to enable us to pass custom props to our HTML button, what I'm going to do is I am going to import that utility function. So from, get rid of this. So from our Firebase Utils, we want to import sign in with Google. And on the on-click event of our button, we will pass it the sign in with Google. Now, the problem is that because this is a button, by default, it's going to submit because we have it inside of a form. But in the next tutorial, when we actually implement sign in with email and password, we're going to need this sign in component to actually be a class. So I'm going to refactor this component to be a class. So as well as importing React, I'm going to destructure from React component. And the class sign in will extend component, but we're also going to need our render method, and we're going to move the return to be inside of that render method. And what we want to do is on submit of our form, so on submit, we are going to call another method called handle submit. And what this will be is an async function. So it's going to equal async. We'll take an event. And what we want to do is just grab that event and prevent default. And by doing that, when the user clicks this button, the page is not going to be forced to reload, which is the default functionality of a HTML button that submits. So let's return to our browser and let's click on sign in with Google. In fact, let's just refresh the page first and sign in with Google. You're going to get a pop-up, and once it's loaded, there you go. So you can see that I'm prompted to either use a different account or to sign in with my current Google account. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with that. And as simple as that, I'm now signed into my application. And I've implemented the Google sign-in successfully into my application. Now, at the moment, we don't have any visual cues in our application to show that I'm signed in. And I'm going to cover that in just a second. But let's just head back over to our Firebase. And what I want to do is go to Authentication. And what you'll see is that under Users, under the Users tab of Authentication, we now have ourselves, the account, the Google account that we just signed in. So you can see that it has successfully worked. But what I want to point out here is that this is not actually stored in our database. So you can see that this has come from the provider. You can see it's a Google sign-in. They do have a UID, but they have not been created in our database, which is actually going to be the next step of this process. We need to actually create that document in our users collection. Okay, so although we have now got the sign-in functionality, the problem is that our application is still unaware if the user's auth status changes. So we don't know if the user is logged in or not, and therefore we can't modify our application based on that status. So to do that, let's return to our text editor, and we need to go to the root of our application, which is currently app.js. And we need to import Auth from our Firebase Utilities file. So we're going to import from Firebase Utils, and we need to import Auth. Now once we do that, we need to think about how this is going to work. And we need to use some lifecycle hooks, specifically component will mount and unmount. So we need to convert this from a functional component to a class. Right, so we need to as well destructure component from React, and when we say class app, we need to extend component. We need a render method, which is here, and we need to move our return statement basically inside of our render method, and then that will allow us to actually not only work with lifecycle hooks, but we need some initial state. So I'm going to say const initial state, and all this will be is current user, which is going to equal null by default. So because of that, we need a constructor where we can set that initial state. So this dot state equals, and use a spread operator to pass that initial state. And once we have done that, what we can do is create our lifecycle hook for component did mount, and also component will unmount. The way that this is going to work is we're going to set up an event listener to subscribe to a function on our auth object here that will allow us to determine when a user has signed in. And then we need to use this component will unmount lifecycle hook to ensure that we don't get any memory leaks in our application. And when this unmounts, we need to unsubscribe from that event listener. So to do that, it's actually quite straightforward. So what we need to do is we need to, first of all, set up our event listener. So we're going to just have a auth listener, which is going to equal null by default. And then we'll say this dot auth listener equals auth dot on auth state changed. And this is where we subscribe to that. And what we get here is a user auth object. And if the user is not signed in, this will return null, right? So if this is null, so if this doesn't exist, we want to return from this function. Otherwise, we want to set our state and our current user to the result of our user auth. And then when we are going to unmount, we need to call our auth listener, and that will unsubscribe, right? Because onAuth state changed returns a function which you can trigger, and it will unsubscribe. So let's now return back to our web browser, and using React Developer Tools, let's look at the state itself. So if I'm in app, I have current users, and you can see that I have a massive object here, which contains various different information, specifically a UID, which is quite important. But this actually is happening because I am currently logged in, because when I implemented the Google sign-in, I logged in, as you will recall. If I was not logged in, this would be null. Now, how can we actually use this in our application to make modifications to our layout? So let's look at that. Let's come back over to our text editor, and what we want to do, and the reason we put this code on our root component, which is app.js, is because it will allow us to pass it to our other components. So before our render statement, I need to destructure that current user from state. So let's destructure that. So we need to destructure that from state. It's current user. And we need to pass our current user to our layout component. Now in the future, we will use Redux and refactor this to use state management. But for now, to keep it simple, let's just pass this to our layout components directly. So we're going to pass current user here to our various layouts. We have two layouts. We're going to pass it to both. And then when we come into our layout components, so we have our layouts folder and our home layout. We have our header here. So we want to just take these props and we're just going to pass it to all the props into our header component, right? And we'll do the same for main. So we already get the props here. We'll just pass the props down to our header component. So we've done that in both of our layout files here. And that means that when we come through to our header component, we'll have access to current user. So we can actually just destructure that here. So from props we can destructure, it's current user. We can destructure that. So if we actually look at our header component in the browser here, you'll see we have current user. So let's come back over here now, back to our component, and just on our header, we need to have a default prop, which is going to be for current user, and we'll just set this to null. All right, that's our default prop for current user. So I can now use this current user to actually conditionally render different things on the header component. So for an example, I will only render the links to login or register, and I'm only going to render them if the user is not logged in. And if the user is logged in, so this current user is not null, then I'm going to render a different unordered list with a different list item, which for now is just going to contain a span with a logout text, right? And if I already come back to the browser, you're going to see that if I return here and log in, so let's log in, then I'm now seeing a different link in the header that says logout, which is great. But now let's come back over to the editor, and what we want to do is we actually want to make, when this is clicked, we actually want to log the user out. So to do that, what we're going to do is import from our Firebase utility. So we need to come out of our current directory, go into Firebase Utils, and we need to import Auth. And on the onClick event, which is here, we need to call auth.signout. So when this is clicked, it will sign the user out. But there's one problem here, right? Is even though this will clear the session, it's not going to update the state in our application. So to do that, we need to come back over to app.js, and rather than return at this point, let's actually do another this.setState and restore the initial state here, like that. Now let's return to our application in the browser and let's log out, and you're going to see that again the header updates and we are now logged out of our application. But how do we handle redirects? So again, let's come back over to our browser, and this is really easy. Let's come over to our app.js file, and where we have our routes, we have this render method, and we also already have destructured current user from state. So it's actually exactly the same as what we just did in our header component. So what I'm going to do is on my login route, if I'm logged in, I should be redirected to the home page. Okay, so I'm going to move the render to another line, and I'm going to import from React Router DOM another component, which is the redirect component, and that will allow me to do the following. So if current user exists, then I'm going to return the redirect component, and if not, I will return the main layout as normal. But we want to redirect the user to the home page. So it looks like that, right? And we can just tab this in to be a little bit nicer. Now let's come back over to our browser and see it in action. So this is my login page. So let's go to the home page. Now let's click on login. We come to our login page. Let's sign in with Google. We get our pop-up. We can sign in. And now the header updates, and I'm also taken to the home page. And if I sign out, then the header updates, and I can click on login again. And as you can see, I'm redirected appropriately. Okay, so at this point, we've managed to successfully sign users into our application, but we're not storing their information in our database. So let's address that issue right now. Let's come back over to our code editor, and what we need to do is come back into app.js, and we need to update the code that we have inside of our event listener. So let's just delete the code that's in there currently and move over to our Firebase utility file, because we need to create a new utility function that's going to handle the user's profile. So it's going to be called export const handle user profile. It's going to be an async function. It's going to accept two things. The first is going to be the user auth object. We get this back in our event listener. And the second thing is going to be any additional data that we might want to pass. Right? Okay, and what we want to do, the first thing is just make sure that the user is actually a valid user. So if, for example, the user auth is null, we want to just return immediately. Otherwise, we want to check if the user is currently in our users collection. So to do that, we're going to say const and user ref, right? And I'm going to explain this in a second, but what we need to do is call our Firestore and firestore.doc, and then we need to use string interpolation to specify the collection, which is users, and then we need to destructure from the user auth object, right, the user's UID. Now this is the user's ID. We need to take that and we need to insert it here. Now when we do this, I want to just explain what this actually is, because it's basically a path to the document, right? So let's come back over to our database, our Firebase database, and let's look at how this works. So we have a users collection here, and inside of this users collection we have documents, and the document's name is the ID or the UID of the user. So when I give it this path, which is the users collection and the UID, I'm giving it a direct path to this document. Now if the user exists in our database, then this document will be there. If the document does not exist in our database, then we know it's a new user and we need to create that document. Okay, so let's implement that now. Now what this is going to return is a reference document, which will come attached with a couple of methods that we can use to either get data or set data, right? And the set method basically creates a new document, right? So let's actually use that. So what we need to do is create a snapshot, and we need to await this response, but we need to call our user ref .get. And what this will return is another object which has various properties on it, but the one we're interested in is snapshot.exists. And snapshot.exists is basically going to be a Boolean value of either true or false, and what that is going to do is tell us if this document at this address exists or not. And I already explained how that works. Now if this does not exist, if this document does not exist, then we want to implement a simple try catch here. So we're going to say try catch, and if there is an error, we'll just console log the error itself. But we want to again await this, but what we need to do here is basically say we have this user ref document and we want to use the set method on this to actually add and create this new document. But what do we want to actually store in the database? Well, we can destructure some more things from our user auth object, which comes with all of the information that we need. So we have, for example, a display name. We also have the user's email, but we also want to create a timestamp. So I'm going to create a timestamp here, which is going to be simply a new date. And then we can use that here. So we can actually say we want to store the display name, we want their email, we want a created date, which is just going to be our timestamp. But then I'm also going to pass any additional data that I might have passed to this utility function. Now, once we've finished and we've run through all of this code, I also want to simply return the user ref document. And the reason I'm going to return this is because I want to use this to actually update the local state of my application. Awesome. So hopefully some of that made sense. If not, hopefully it will shortly, because we need to implement this now in our app.js file. So let's come back over to the top and import that utility function from our Firebase Utils along with Auth. And then within our event listener itself, what we need to do is check if the user auth is null or not. Now, assuming that it is not null, what we want to do is grab hold of our user ref, and we can get that again because we're going to await the response of our handle profile, user profile utility function. We need to pass it our user auth object, of course. The reason I call it user ref here is because in our util file, and a function, at the end, if you remember, we're returning that user ref document, which has all of these various methods which we can use to handle the user profile document. Well, it also enables us to do something else, right? So we can listen, we can subscribe to this user ref, and we can await the an on snapshot event, in which case we can get that snapshot, and at this point we can actually use this to update the local state of our application. So what I'm going to do here is say this.setState, and we need to update the current user with this information, which is going to be ID, which is snapshot.id. And then what we can actually also do is get all of the data that we've saved or we have stored in the database for this particular document. So again, to get that information, all we do is a spread object, we say snapshot, and we have another method which is data. Now if this is null, the user is not logged in, then all we're going to do is say this.setState, and we're going to restore the initial state. Great. That looks really good. So let's come back over to our browser. Let's go to our site, and we're getting an error. So let's come back over to our text editor, and I missed something here. This just needs to be async here because we're using this await keyword. So if you're familiar with async await, yeah, you might have spotted that, but cool. Let's come back over to our browser, and you can see we're not getting errors, but let's log in. So let's go to our login page, click on sign in with Google, and let's go ahead and sign in. We're going to get redirected to our home page, which is correct. We can come back over to Firebase and our database. You can see we now have a new document, and if I click in that, I get all the fields: my email, name, the created date, which is our timestamp. So we're now successfully storing the user's data in my database. I can also come over to my React application, and I can click on Logout, and I'm logged out. I can come back and log in again. So there you go. We've successfully implemented Google sign-in into our application. We're storing their data. We're manipulating components based on their Auth status. Fantastic. Now in the next video, we're going to be looking at actually implementing sign up using your email and password. So once again, thank you for watching this video tutorial. I appreciate it. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support goes a long way, but more than anything, have a great day, and thank you for watching.